The day is finally here. Plato's Republic. What an exciting, life-changing book for so many people. I think like every single philosopher, like one of my philosophy professors, like this is the book that changed the trajectory of their life where they decided to become philosophers. So we're getting into it. And now that we have the foundation of like Socrates and have kind of teased out like how this is like such a central book in Western tradition of thought. It's it's going to be a good day. Just before we get into that, I'll also say like I guess this is about like our um, we've gotten a few episodes in, so by all means, like if you have any critiques or like things I can do to improve this, by all means, drop them in the comments or shoot me a message. I certainly would appreciate any feedback you have, and that would be great. The goal is to make sure this is still listenable so that you can enjoy it, and we'll keep trying to improve from there. I do know like there are some people who are like, oh, talk at X number of beats per minute, or try having more inflection points, or more stories, or yeah, I guess I'm not really sure if you. I mean, certainly, I think it's like only a few people who I already know who are actually listening to this at this point, but I know like Solomon will be listening to these in the future, I presume, or other people, I guess. So by all means, shoot me. You won't hurt my feelings by any means. This is a bit of a beast of a book, um, and this has the interpretive essay by Alan Bloom at the back. So I kind of deciding how I'm still deciding how I'm gonna go into this. Oh, that's where my military my military ID. From the last time I was reading. Oh yeah, that's the end of book one. So I'm going to read the Spark Notes first. It's only 4 pages, but it kind of gives an outline of the whole book and gets our mind thinking about what to expect throughout it and the themes to be looking for. And then I'm going to be diving into the text itself and to the interpretive essay. But I'm not sure how long it's going to take. It is 10 chapters, so I am kind of thinking of doing one chapter a day for 10 days I can get to sit down and actually do this. The book after this, oh yeah, this is also a good time to point out the major differences between like Plato and Aristotle, because they have very different views about how to pursue philosophy in general. So Plato is very much an idealistic person. He is very concerned about the good, and so when you see him in paintings, he's often pointing upwards towards the good, and his idealistic nature. So he talks about, even in this book, about the idea of the good and there being a perfected state. Everyone uses the example of a chair. Like there is a way to build a chair where it is, say, stable and is comfortable and you can sit on it and you can there's an ideal form of the good for each object or society. And so we must pursue this good in order to reach that final version or to reach its perfected state. Where Aristotle is you'll see him, he has his arm out straight, which is kind of symbolic of the idea that he is very literal, straightforward, he categorizes things. And so in the next book, the Nicomachean Ethics, you can see that very clearly. So he breaks things down, and he really tries to classify different ways of acting and behaving in the world. You don't want to go too far with things, and you don't want to do it too little of something. So like being courageous is the median point between cowardice and overzealous behaviors. So the goal, so what the eventual conclusion he draws to is that we must pursue the golden mean, and that is what it means to be ethical. Nicomachean is the name of his son. He named the book after his son. So that's nice touch there. But of course, we're starting with the Republic today. I'm going to read the Spark Notes now. Why do men behave justly? Is it because they fear social societal punishment? Are they trembling before notions of divine retribution? Do the stronger elements of society scare the weak into submission in the name of the law? Or do men behave justly because it is good for them to do so? Injustice, regardless of its rewards and punishments, a good thing in and of itself. Is justice, regardless of its reward and punishments, a good thing in and of itself? How do we define justice? Plato sets out to answer these questions in the Republic. He wants to define justice, and to define it in such a way as to show that justice is worthwhile in and of itself. He meets these two challenges with a single solution: a definition of justice that appeals to human psychology rather than to perceived behavior. Plato's strategy in the Republic is first to explicate the primary notion of societal or political justice, and then to derive an analogous concept of individual justice. So this is really the focus of the first half of the book. In books 2, 3, and 4, Plato identifies political justice as harmony in a structured political body. An ideal society consists of three main classes of people: producers, which are the craftsmen, farmers, and artisans; auxiliaries, who are the warriors; and guardians, who are the rulers. A society is just when relations between these three classes are right. Each group must perform its appropriate function, and only that function, and each must be in the right position of power in relation to the others. Rulers must rule, auxiliaries must uphold rulers' convictions, and producers must limit themselves to exercising whatever skills nature granted them. So farming, blacksmithing, painting. Justice is a principle of specialization, a principle that requires that each person fulfill the societal role to which nature fitted them and not interfere with any other business. At the end of Book 4, Plato tries to show that individual justice mirrors political justice. He claims that the soul of every individual has a three-part structure, analogous to the three classes of society. There is a rational part of the soul, which seeks after truth, and is responsible for our philosophical inclinations; a spirited part of the soul, which desires honor and is responsible for our feelings of anger and indignation; and an appetitive part of the soul, which lusts after the sorts of things, but money most of all, since money must be used to fulfill any of these base desires. The just individual can be defined in analogy with the just society. The three parts of his soul achieve the requisite relationships of power and influence in regard to one another. In a just individual, the rational part of the soul rules, the spirited part of the soul supports this rule, and the appetitive part of the soul submits and follows wherever reason leads. Put more plainly, in a just individual, the entire soul aims at fulfilling the desires of the rational part, much as in the just society, the entire community aims at fulfilling whatever the rulers will. The parallels between a just society and the just individual run deep. Each of the three classes of society, in fact, is dominated by one of the three parts of the soul. Producers are dominated by their appetites, or their urges for money, luxury, and pleasures. Warriors are dominated by their spirits, which make them more courageous. Rulers are dominated by their rational faculties and strive for wisdom. Books 5 through 7 focus on the rulers as the philosopher kings. In a series of three analogies, I've been mispronouncing that word. In a series of three analogies, the allegories of the sun, the lion, and the cave, Plato explains who these individuals are while hammering out his theory of the forms. Plato explains that the world is divided into two realms: the visible, which we can grasp with our senses, and the intelligible, which we can only grasp with our mind. The visible world is the universe we see around us. The intelligible world is comprised of the forms, abstract, changeless absolutes, such as goodness, beauty, redness, and sweetness, that exist in permanent relation to the visible realm and make it possible. An apple is red and sweet, and the the theory goes, because it participates in the forms of redness and sweetness. Only the forms are objects of knowledge. Only the forms are objects of knowledge, because only they possess the eternal, unchanging truth that the mind, not the senses, must apprehend. Only those whose minds are trained to grasp the forms, the philosophers, can know anything at all. In particular, what the philosophers must know in order to be able to I'm going to start that sentence again. In particular, what the philosophers must know in order to become able rulers is the form of the good, the source of all other forms, and of knowledge, truth, and beauty. Plato cannot describe this form directly, but he claims that it is the intelligible relation which the sun is to the visible realm. Using the allegory of the cave, Plato paints an evocative portrait of the philosopher's soul moving through various stages of cognition, represented by the line, through the visible realm into the intelligible, and finally grasping the form of the good. The aim of education is not to put knowledge into the soul, but to put the right desires into the soul, to fill the soul with a lust for truth, so that it desires to move past the visible world into the intelligible, ultimately to the form of the good. Philosophers form the only class of men to possess knowledge and are also the most just men. Their souls, more than others, aim to fulfill these desires of the rational part. After comparing the philosopher king to the most unjust type of men, represented by the tyrant, who is ruled entirely by his non-rational appetites, Plato claims that justice is worthwhile for its own sake. In Book 9, he presents 3 arguments for the conclusion that it is desirable to be just. By sketching a psychological portrait of the tyrant, he attempts to prove that injustice tortures a man's psyche, whereas a just soul is a healthy, happy one, untroubled and calm. Next, he argues that, though each of the 3 main character types, money-loving, honor-loving, and truth-loving, have their own concepts of pleasure and the corresponding good life, each choosing his own life as the most pleasant. Only the philosopher can judge because only he has experienced all 3 types of pleasures. The others should accept that the philosopher's judgment and conclude that the pleasures associated with the philosophical are most pleasant, and thus that the just life is also the most pleasant. He tries to demonstrate that only philosophical pleasure is really pleasure at all. All other pleasure is nothing more than a cessation of pain. One might notice that none of these arguments actually prove that justice is desirable apart from its consequences. Instead, they establish that justice is always accompanied by true pleasure. In all probability, none of these is actually supposed to serve as the main reason why justice is desirable. Instead, the desirability of justice is likely connected to the intimate relationship between the just life and the forms. The just life is good in and of itself because it invokes grasping these ultimate goods and imitating their order and harmony, thus incorporating them into one's own life. Justice is good, in other words, because it is connected to the greatest good, the form of the goods. Plato ends the Republic on a surprising note. Having defined justice and established it as the greatest good, he banishes the poets from his city. Poets, he claims, appeal to the basest part of our soul by imitating unjust inclinations. By encouraging us to indulge ignoble emotions in sympathy with the characters we hear out, poetry encourages us to indulge these emotions in life. Poetry, in sum, makes us unjust. In closing, Plato relates the myth of which describes the trajectory of a soul after death. Just souls are rewarded for 1,000 years, while unjust ones are punished for the same amount of time. Each soul must choose its next life. So kind of an odd perception of justice. It's the tripart soul, and in it he also explains that the tripart soul in the individual should then just be expanded to apply to the city-state in general as well. But anyways, we can't get there without actually reading the text. So we're gonna go right back to chapter 1, and we'll begin from there. It's quite exciting. Probably haven't read through this book since for a good, 8 years. I was in, gosh, probably my third year of my undergrad, where we read it as part of our philosophy. That's so funny that my ID is in here. That's the preface. Okay, yeah. So again, this kind of plays out like another Socratic dialogue. So there's Socrates talks with other people throughout. So I'll make sure to try to say their name as it comes up and note who is speaking when. This is also narrated by Socrates. He is the main protagonist of the story. And you can kind of see, like, even as the rejection of poets is perhaps, it makes a lot of sense when you consider Plato's past and how the poets were the ones who killed his teacher, Socrates, when he was about 20 years old. So very clearly, like, it's had an impact on him and his perception of what the good might be and how best to pursue it. But it's a very different way from pursuing truth in the modern age, because a lot of philosophy is just sitting down and thinking and trying to grasp something that's largely intangible. There's no scientific experiments to back up a lot of these claims in the same type of rigor that we would hold truth in the modern age. And so, of course, like, this is just the beginning of philosophy, and this is the foundation of it. So we can't hold it to today's standards, but as we progress through philosophy and we begin to take on more modern thinkers, you'll see how they really hone down on their specific portions of philosophy in order to try to grasp at something deeper and try to use, the way they try to persuade people in the future just comes across very differently than how Plato is trying to convince us here about what the good is. So just note that this is obviously from a completely different time period, and their sources of argumentation is just completely different. So here we go. The Republic, on the Just. Set in year 4... I have notes in here from the previous owner of this book, which narrates Socrates at about... this is set in the year 407 BCE. War still occurring. Plato hasn't yet met Socrates. Oh yeah, so this book is taking place when Socrates is about 59 years old. So here we go. Socrates. I went down to the Piraeus yesterday with Glaucon, son of Astron, to pray to the goddess, and at the same time I wanted to observe how they would put on a festival, since they were now holding it for the very first time. Now, in my opinion, the procession of the native inhabitants was fine, but the one the Thycurians conducted was no less fitting a show. After we had prayed and looked on, we went toward town, which is Athens. Catching sight of us from afar, as we were pressing homeward, Polemarchus, son of Cephalus, ordered his slave boy to run after us and order us to wait for him. The boy took hold of my cloak from behind and said, "Polemarchus orders you to wait." I turned around and asked him where his master was. "He is coming from up behind." "Just wait," he said. "Of course we will wait," said Glaucon. A moment later, Polemarchus came along with Adamantius, Glaucon's brother, Nicetirus, son of Nicus, and some others, apparently from the procession. Polemarchus said, "Socrates, I guess you too are hurrying to get away from town." "That is not a bad guess," I said. "Well," he said, "do you see how many of us there are?" "Of course." "Well then," he said, "either prove stronger than these men, or stay here." "Isn't there still one other possibility?" I said. "Our persuading you that you must let us go?" "Could you really persuade?" he said. "If we don't listen?" "There's no way," said Glaucon. "Well then, think it over, bearing in mind we won't listen." And Adamantius said, Is it possible you don't know that at sunset there will be a torch race on horseback for the goddess?" On horseback, I said. This is novel. Will they hold torches and pass them on to one another while racing the horses? Or what do you mean? That's it, said Polemarchus. And besides, they'll put on an all-night festival that will be worth seeing. We'll get up after dinner and go see it. There we'll be together with many of the young men and we'll talk. So stay and do as I tell you. And Glaucon said, It seems we must stay. Well, if it is so resolved, I said, that's how we must act. Then we went to Polemarchus's home. There we found Lysias and Ethodemus, Polemarchus's brother, and in addition Thrasymachus and the Chalcedonian, and Cheremantius the Penesian, and Cleitophon, the son of Aristomus. These names are so much. Cephalus, Polemarchus's father, was at home, and he seemed very old to me, for I had not seen him for some time. He was seated on a sort of cushioned stool that was crowned with a wreath, for he had just performed a sacrifice in the courtyard. We sat down beside him, for some stools were arranged in the circle there. As soon as Cephalus saw me, he greeted me warmly and said, Socrates, you don't come down to us in the Piraeus very often, yet you ought to. Now, if I still have the strength to make the trip to town easily, there would be no need for you to come here. Rather, we would come to you. As it is, however, you must come here more frequently. I want you to know that as the other pleasures, those connected with the body, wither away from me, the desires and pleasures that have to do with speeches grow the more. Now I do say, be with these young men, but come here regularly to us as friends and your very own kin. For my part, Cephalus, I am really delighted to discuss with the very old, I said, since they are like men who have proceeded on a certain road that perhaps we too will have to take. One ought, in my opinion, to learn from them what sort of road it is, whether it is rough and hard or easy and smooth. From you in particular, I should like to learn how it looks for you. For you are now just at the time of life the poets called the threshold of old age. It is a hard time of life, or what have you to report of it? By Zeus, I should tell you just how it looks to me, Socrates, he said. Some of us who are about the same age often meet together and keep up the old proverb. Now then, when they meet, most of the members of our group lament, longing for the pleasures of youth, and reminiscing about sex, about drinking bouts and feasts, and all that goes with things of that sort. They take it hard, as though they were deprived of something very important, and had then lived well, but are now not even alive. Some also bewail the abuse that old age receives from relatives, and in this key they sing a refrain about all the evils of old age has caused them. But Socrates, in my opinion, these men do not put their fingers on the cause. For if this were the cause, I too would have suffered these same things insofar as they depend on old age, and so would everyone else who has come to this point in life. But as it is, I have encountered others for whom it was not so, especially Sophocles. Sophocles was another famous philosopher, I believe, or was an important figure. I just don't remember who he is and what he did. I was once present when the poet was asked by someone, Sophocles, how are you in sex? Can you still have intercourse with a woman? Silence, man, he said. Most joyful did I escape it. As though I had run away from a sort of frenzied and savage master. I thought at the time that he had spoken well, and I still do. For in every way, old age brings great peace and freedom from such things. When the desires cause to strain and finally relax, then what Sophocles says comes to pass in every way. It is possible to be rid of very many mad masters, but of these things and of those that concern relatives, there is one just cause, not old age, Socrates, but the character of human beings. If they are orderly and content with themselves, even old age is only moderately troublesome. If they are not, then both age, Socrates, and youth, Socrates. If they are not, then both age, Socrates, and youth alike turn out to be hard for that sort. Then I was full of wonder at what he had said. Wanting him to say still more, I stirred him up, saying, Cephalus, when you say these things, I suppose that the many do not accept them from you, but believe rather that it is not due to character that you bear old age so easily, but due to possessing great substance. They say that for the rich there are many consolations. What you say is true, he said. They do not accept them, and do they have some they do have something there, but not, however, quite as much as they think. Rather, the saying of Themistocles holds good. When a Cephrean abused him, saying that he was illustrious not thanks to him, but thanks to the city, he answered that if he himself had been a Cephrean, he would not have made a name, nor would that man have made one, had he been an Athenian. And the same argument also holds good for those who are not wealthy and bear old age with difficulty. The decent man would not bear old age with poverty very easily, nor would the one who is not a decent sort ever to be content with himself, even if he were wealthy. Cephalus, I said, did you inherit or did you earn most of what you possess? What do you mean? Earned, Socrates, he said. As a money maker, I was a sort of mean between my grandfather and my father. For my grandfather, whose namesake I am, inherited pretty nearly as much substance as I now possess, and he increased it many times over. Eliseus, my father, used it to point where it was still less than it is now. I am satisfied if I leave not less, but rather a bit more than I inherited to my sons here. The reason I ask, you see, I said, is that to me you didn't seem overly fond of money. For the most part, those who do not make money themselves are that way. Those who do make it are twice as attached to it as the others. For just as poets are fond of their poems and fathers of their children, so money makers too are serious about money as their own product, and they are also serious about it for the same reason other men are, for its use. They are, therefore, hard even to be with because they are willing to praise nothing but wealth. What you say is true, he said. Indeed it is, I said. But tell me something more. What do you possess? What do you suppose is the greatest good that you have enjoyed from possessing great wealth? What I say wouldn't persuade many others, for I know well, Socrates, that when a man comes near to the realization that he will be making an end, fear and care enter him for things to which he gave no thought before. The tales told about what is in Hades, that the one who has done unjust deeds here must pay the penalty there, at which he laughed up to then, now make his soul twist and turn because he fears that they might be true. Whether it is due to the debility of old age, and whether he discerns something more of the things in that place because he is already nearer to them, as it were, he is, at any rate, now full of suspicion and terror, and he reckons up his accounts and considers whether he has done anything unjust to anyone. Now the man who finds many unjust deeds in his life often even wakes from his sleep in a fright as children do, and lives in anticipation of evil. To the man who is conscious in himself of no unjust deed, sweet and good hope is ever beside him, a nurse of his old age, as Pindar puts it. For you know, Socrates, he put it charmingly when he said that whoever lives out of a just and holy life, sweet hope accompanies, fostering his heart, a nurse of his old age, hope which most of all pilots the ever-turning opinion of mortals. How very wonderfully well he said that. For this I count the possession of money most worthwhile, not for any man, but for the decent and orderly one. The possession of money contributes a great deal to not cheating or lying to any man against one's will, and, moreover, to not departing for that other place frightened because one owes some sacrifices to a god or money to a human being. It also has many other uses. But still, one thing reckoned against another, I wouldn't count this as the least thing, Socrates, for wealth for which wealth is very useful to an intelligent man. What you say is fine, said indeed, Cephalus, I said. But as to this very thing, justice, shall we so... Okay, Ciara, you okay? What you say is fine indeed, Cephalus. But as to this very thing, justice, shall we so simply assert that it is the truth and giving back what a man has taken from another? Or is to do these very things sometimes just and sometimes unjust? Take this case as an example of what I mean. Everyone would surely say that if a man takes weapons from a friend when the latter is of sound mind, that the friend demands them back when he is mad, one shouldn't give them back such things, and the man who gave them back would not be just. And moreover, one should not be willing to tell someone, in this state, the whole truth. What you say is right, he said. Then this isn't the definition of justice, speaking the truth and giving back what one takes. It most certainly is, Socrates, interrupted Polemarchus, at least if Simonides should be believed at all. Well then, said Cephalus, I hand down the argument to you, for it's already time for me to look after the sacrifices. Am I not heir of what belongs to you, said Polemarchus. Certainly, he said and laughed. And with that they went away to the sacrifices. Tell me, you heir of the argument, I said, what is it that Simonides said about justice that you assert he said correctly? That it is just to give to each what is owed, he said. In saying this, he said a fine thing, at least in my opinion. Well, it certainly isn't easy to disbelieve a Simonides, I said. He is a wise and divine man. However, you, Polemarchus, perhaps know what on earth he means, but I do not understand. For plainly, he doesn't mean what we were just saying, giving back to any man whatsoever something he has deposited when, of unsound mind, he demands it, and yet when he deposits it is surely owed to him, isn't it? Yes. But when of unsound mind he demands it, it should under no condition be given to him. True, he said. Then Simonides, it seems means something different from the sort of thing when he says that it is just to give back what is owed. Of course it's different, by Zeus, he said, for he supposes that friends owe it to friends to do some good and nothing bad. I understand, I said. A man does not give what is owed in giving back gold to someone who has deposited it, when the giving and the taking turn out to be bad, assuming the taker and the giver are friends. Isn't this what you assert Simonides means? Isn't this what you assert Simonides? Most certainly. Now what about this? Must we give back to enemies whatever is owed to them? That is exactly it, he said. Just what's owed to them, and I suppose that an enemy owes his enemy the very thing which is also fitting, some harm. Then, I said, it seems that Simonides made a riddle, after the fashion of poets, when he said what the just is, for it looks as if he thought that it is just to give everyone what is fitting, and to this he gave the name what is owed. What do you think, he said. In the name of Zeus, I said, if someone were to ask him, Simonides, the art called medicine gives what is owed, gives what that is owed, and fitting to which things. What do you suppose he would answer us? It's plain, he said, drugs, food, and drinks to the body. The art of cooking gives what is owed and fitting to which things? Seasonings to meat. All right. Now then, the art that gives to which things would be called justice. If the answer has to be consistent with what precedes, Socrates, he said, the one that gives benefits and harms to friends and enemies. Does he mean that justice is doing good to friends and harm to enemies? In my opinion. With respect to disease and health, who is most able to do good to sick friends and bad to enemies? A doctor. And with respect to the danger of the sea, who has this power over those who are sailing? A pilot. And what about the just man? In what action and with respect to what work is he most able to help friends and harm enemies? In my opinion, it is in the making of war and being an ally in battle. All right. However, to men who are not sick, my friend Polemarchus, a doctor is useless. True. And to men who are not sailing, a pilot, yes. Then to men who are not at war, is the just man useless? Hardly so, in my opinion. Is justice also useful in peacetime? It is useful. And so is farming, isn't it? Yes. For the acquisition of the fruits of the earth? Yes. And further, is shoemaking also useful? Yes. You would say, I suppose, for the acquisition of shoes? Certainly. What about justice, then? For the use or acquisition of what would you say it is useful in peacetime? Contracts, Socrates. Do you mean contracts, partnerships, or something else? Partnerships, of course. Then is the just man a good and useful partner in setting down draughts? Or it is the skilled player of draughts? The skilled player of draughts. In setting down bricks and stones, is the just man a more useful and better partner than the house builder? Not at all. But in what partnership, then, is the just man a better partner than the harp player, just as the harp player is better than the just man when one has to do with notes? In money matters, in my opinion. Except perhaps in using money, Polemarchus, when a horse must be bought or sold with money in partnership, then, I suppose, the expert on horses is a better partner. Isn't that so? It looks like that. And further, when it's a ship, the shipbuilder or pilot is better. It seems so. Then when gold or silver must be used in partnership, in what case is the just man more useful than the others? When they must be deposited and kept safe, Socrates. Do you mean when there is no need to use them and they are left lying? Certainly. Is it when money is useless that justice is useful for it? I'm afraid so. And when a pruning hook must be guarded, justice is useful both in partnership and in private, but when it must be used, vine culture. It looks like it. Will you also assert that when a shield and a lyre must be guarded and not used, justice is useful, but when they must be used, the soldier's art and the musician's art are useful? Necessarily. And with respect to everything else as well, is justice useless in the use of each and useful in its uselessness? I'm going to read that again. And with respect to everything else as well, is justice useless in the use of each and useful in its uselessness? I'm afraid so. Then justice, my friend, wouldn't be anything very serious if it is useful for useless things. Let's look at it this way. Isn't the man who is cleverest at landing a blow in boxing or any other kind of fight also the one cleverest at guarding against it? Certainly. And whoever is clever at guarding against disease is also cleverest at getting away with producing it? In my opinion, at any rate. And of course, a good guardian of an army is the very same man who can also steal the enemy's plans and his other dispositions. Certainly. So, of whatever a man is a clever guardian, he is also a clever thief. It seems so. So that if a man is clever at guarding money, he is also clever at stealing it. So the argument indicates, at least, he said. The just man, then, as it seems, has come to light as a kind of robber, and I'm afraid you learned this from Homer, for he admires Autoclus, Odysseus' grandfather, on his mother's side, and says he surpassed all men in stealing and in swearing oaths. Justice then seems, according to you and Homer and Simonides, to be a certain art of stealing for the benefit, to be sure, of friends and the harm of enemies. Isn't that what you meant? No, by Zeus, he said, but I no longer know what I mean. However, it is still my opinion that justice is helping friends and harming enemies. Do you mean by friends those who seem to be good to to be good to an individual or those who are, even if they don't seem to be, and similarly with enemies? It's likely, he said, that the men who believes to be good one loves, while those he considers bad one hates. But don't human beings make mistakes about this, so that many seem to them to be good, although they are not, and vice versa? They do make mistakes. So for them, the good are enemies and the bad are friends. Certainly. But nevertheless, it's still just for them to help the bad and harm the good. It looks like it. Yet the good are just, and such as not to do injustice. True. Then according to your argument, it's just to treat badly men who have done nothing unjust. Not at all, Socrates, for the argument seems to be bad. Then after all, I said, it's just to harm the unjust and help the just. This looks finer than what we just said. Then for many, Polemarchus, all human beings who make mistakes, it will turn out to be just to harm friends, for their friends are bad, and just to help enemies, for they are good. So we shall say the very opposite of what we had asserted Simonides means. It really does turn out that way, he said. But let's change what we set down at the beginning, for I'm afraid we didn't set down the definition of friend and enemy correctly. How did we do it, Polemarchus? We set down that the man who seems good is a friend. Now, I said, how shall we change it? The man who seems to be and is good is a friend, he said, while the man who seems good and is not, seems to be but is not a friend. Seems to be but is not a friend, and will take the same position about the enemy. Then the good man, as it seems, will by this argument be a friend, and the good-for-nothing man an enemy. Yes. You order us to add something to what we said the first about the just. Then we will add that it is just to do good to the friend and bad to the enemy. Well, now we are to say in addition that it is just to do good to the friend if he is good, and harm to the enemy if he is bad. Most certainly, he said. Said in that way, it would be fine, in my opinion. It is then, I said, the part of a just man to harm any human being whatsoever. Certainly, he said, bad men and enemies ought to be harmed. Do horses that have been harmed become better or worse? Worse. With respect to the virtue of dogs, or to that of the horses? With respect to that of horses. And when dogs are harmed, do they become worse with respect to the virtue of dogs and not to that of horses? Necessarily. Should we not assert the same of human beings, my comrade? That when they are harmed, they become worse with respect to human virtue? Most certainly. But isn't justice human virtue? That's also necessary. Then, my friend, human beings who have been harmed necessarily become more unjust. It seems so. Well, are musicians able to make men unmusical by music? Impossible. Are men skilled in horsemanship able to make men incompetent riders by horsemanship? That can't be. But are just men able to make others unjust by justice of all things? Or, in some, are good men able to make other men bad by virtue? Impossible. For I suppose that cooling is not the work of heat, but its opposite. Yes. Nor wetting the work of dryness, but its opposite. Certainly. Nor is harming, in fact, the work of the good, but its opposite. It looks like that. And is the just man who is good? Certainly. Then, it is not the work of the just man to harm either a friend or anyone else, Polemarchus, but of its opposite, the unjust man. In my opinion, Socrates, he said, what you say is certainly true. Then if someone asserts that it is just to give what is owed to each man, and he understands by this that harm is owed to his enemies by the just man and help to friends, the man who said it was not wise, for he wasn't telling the truth. For it has become apparent to us that it is never just to harm anyone. I agree, he said. We shall do battle then as partners, you and I said. If someone asserts that Simenes, or Bias, and Pittacus, or any other wise and blessed man said it, I, for one, he said, am ready to be your partner in the battle. Do you know, I said, to whom, in my opinion, that saying belongs which asserts that it is just to help friends and harm enemies? To whom, he said. I suppose it belongs to Perdier, or Pittacus, or Xerxes, or Imenes the Theban, or some other rich man who has a high opinion of what he can do. What you say is very true. All right, I said. Since it has become apparent that neither justice nor the just is this, what else would one say that are? Now Thrasymachus had many times started out to take over the argument in the midst of our discussion, but he has been restrained by the men sitting near him, who wanted to hear the argument out. But when we paused and I said this, he could no longer keep quiet. Hunched up like a wild beast, he flung himself at us, as if to tear us to pieces. Then both Polemarchus and I got all in a flutter from fright. And he shouted out into our midst and said, What is this nonsense that has possessed you for so long, Socrates? And why do you act like fools, making way for one another? If you truly want to know what the just is, don't only ask and gratify your love of honor by refuting whatever someone answers. You know that it is easier to ask than to answer, but answer yourself and say what you assert the just to be, and see to it you don't tell me that it is the needful, or the helpful, or the profitable, or the gainful, or the advantageous, but tell me clearly and precisely what you mean, for I won't accept it if you say such inalities. Inalities? I was astounded when I heard him, and looking at him, I was frightened. I think that if I had not seen him before he saw me, I would have been speechless. As it was, just when he began to be exasperated by the argument, I had looked at him first, so that I was able to answer him, and with just a trace of a tremor, I said, Thrasymachus, don't be so hard on us. If we are making any mistake in the consideration of arguments, Polemarchus and I know well and what we're making an unwilling mistake. If we were searching for gold, we would never unwillingly make way for one another in search and ruin our chances of finding it. So don't suppose that when we are seeking for justice, a thing more precious than a great deal of gold, we would ever foolishly give in to one another and not be as serious as we can be about bringing it to light. Don't you suppose that, my friend? Rather, as I suppose, we are not competent. So it's surely far more fitting for us to be pitied by you, clever man, than to be treated harshly. He listened, burst out laughing very scornfully, and said, Hercules! Here is a habitual irony of Socrates. I knew it, and I predicted to these fellows that you wouldn't be willing to answer, that you would be ironic and do anything rather than answer if someone asked you anything. That's because you are why, Thrasymachus, I said. Hence you knew quite well that if you ask someone how much 12 is, and in asking him beforehand, see to it you don't tell me, you human being, that it is 2 times 6, or 3 times 4, or 6 times 2, or 4 times 3. I won't accept such nonsense from you. It was plain to you, I suppose, that no one would answer a man who asks in this way. And if he asked Thrasymachus, what do you mean? Shall I answer none of those you mentioned before? Even if it happens to be one of these, shall I say something other than the truth? You surprising man. Or what do you mean? What would you say to him in response? Very well, he said, as if this case were similar to the other. Nothing prevents it from being, I said. And even granting that it's not simpler, but looks like it is to the man who asked, do you think he'll any the less answer what appears to him, whether we forbid him to or not? Well, is that what you are going to do? He said. Are you going to give us an answer, one of those I forbid? I shouldn't be surprised, I said, if that were my opinion upon consideration. I'm just going to check how long this book is. Wow, we've got a ways to go. It goes to 34, and we're on 15. What if I could show you another answer about justice besides all these and better than they are? He said. What punishment do you think you would deserve to suffer? What else than the one it is fitting for a man who does not know to suffer? I said. And surely it is fitting for him to learn from the man who knows. So this is what I think I deserve to suffer. That's because you are an agreeable chap, he said. But in addition to learning, pay a fine in money too. When I get some, I said. He has some, said Glaucon. Now for money's sake, speak, Thermachus, and we shall all contribute for Socrates. I certainly believe it, he said, so that Socrates can get away with his usual trick. He'll not answer himself, and when someone else has answered, he'll get hold of the argument and refutes it. You best of men, I said, how could a man answer who, in first place, does not know and does not profess to know, and who, in the second place, even if he does have some supposition about these things, is forbidden to say what he believes by no ordinary man? It's more fitting for you to speak, for you are the one who says he knows and can tell. Now, do I say, gratify me by answering, and don't begrudge your teaching to Glaucon here and the others. After I said this, Glaucon and the others begged him to do as I asked. And Thermachus evidently desired to speak so that he could win a good reputation, since he believed he had a very fine answer. But he kept up the pretense of wanting to prevail on me to do the answering. Finally, however, he concluded and said this. Here is the wisdom of Socrates, unwilling himself to teach. He goes around learning from others and does not give thanks to them. When you say, I learn from others, I said, you speak the truth. Thermachus, but when you say I do not make full payment in thanks, you lie. For I pay as much as I can. I am only able to praise. I have no money. How eagerly I do so when I think someone speaks well. You will well know as soon as you have answered, for I suppose you will speak then. Now listen, he said. I say that the just is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger. Well, why don't you praise me? But you won't be willing. First, I must learn what you mean, I said, for as it is, I don't yet understand. You say the just is the advantage of the stronger. Whatever do you mean by that, Thermachus? You surely don't assert such a thing as this. If Polydamas, the Panacragus, is stronger than we are, and beef is advantageous for the body, then this food is also advantageous and just for us who are weaker than he is. You are disgusting, Socrates, he said. You take hold of the argument in the way you can work it the most harm. Not at all, best of men. Just tell me more clearly what you mean. Don't you know that some cities are ruled by tyrannical, some democratically, and some aristocratically? Of course, in each city, the ruling group master, certainly. And each ruling group sets down laws for its own advantage. A democracy sets down democratic laws, a tyranny tyrannical laws, and others do the same. And they declare that what they have set down for their own advantage is just for the ruled, and the man who departs from it they punish as the breaker of law and doer of unjust deeds. This, best of men, is what I mean. In every city, the same thing is just. The advantage of the established ruling body it surely is master. So the man who reasons rightly concludes that everywhere justice is the same thing, the advantage of the stronger. Now, I said, I understand what you mean. Whether it is true or not, I'll try to find out. Now you too answer that the just is the advantageous. Thermachus, although you forbade me to give that answer, of course, for the stronger is added onto it. A small addition, perhaps, he said. It isn't plain yet whether it is a big one, but it is plain that we must consider whether what you say is true. That must be considered, because while I too agree that the just is something of the advantage, you add to it and assert that it's the advantage of the stronger, and I don't know whether it's so. Go ahead and consider, he said. That's what I'm going to do, I said. Now tell me, don't you say, though, that it's also just to obey the rulers? I do. Are the rulers in their several cities infallible, or are they such as to make mistakes too? By all means, he said, they certainly are such as to make mistakes too. When they put their hands to setting laws down, do they set some down correctly and some incorrectly? I suppose so. Is that law correct which sets down what is advantageous for themselves, and that the incorrect which sets down what is disadvantageous? Or how do you mean it? As you say, but whatever the ruler set down must be done by those who are ruled, and this is the just, of course. Then according to your argument, it's just to do not only what is advantageous for the stronger, but also its opposite. What is disadvantageous? What do you mean? He said. What you mean, it seems to me. Let's consider it better. Wasn't it agreed that the rulers, when they command the ruled to do something, sometimes completely mistake what is best for themselves? While it is just for the ruled to do whatever the rulers command, weren't those things agreed upon? I suppose so. Well then, also suppose that you're agreed that it is just to do what is disadvantageous for those who are the rulers and the stronger, when the rulers unwillingly command what is bad for themselves, and you assert it is just to do what they have commanded. In this case, most wise Thromachus, doesn't it necessarily follow that it is just for the others to do the opposite of what you say? For the weaker are commanded to do what is doubtless disadvantageous for the stronger. Yes, by Zeus, said Polemarchus, most clearly. If it's you who are to witness for him, Polemarchus, said Cleitophon, interrupting. What need is there of a witness, he said. Thromachus himself agrees that the rulers sometimes command what is bad for themselves, and that it is just for the others to do these things. That's because Thromachus has set down that to do what the rulers bid is just, Polemarchus. And because, Cleitophon, he also set down that the advantage of the stronger is just. Once he had set both of these principles down, he further agreed that sometimes the stronger ordered those who are weaker and are ruled to do what is the disadvantage of the stronger. On the basis of these arguments, the advantage of the stronger would be no more just than the disadvantage. But, Cleitophon, he said that the advantage of the stronger is what the stronger believes to be his advantage. This is what must be done by the weaker, and this is what he set down as the just. That's not what he said Polemarchus. It doesn't make any difference, Polemarchus, I said. If Thromachus says it this way now, let's accept it from him. Now tell me, Thromachus, was this what you wanted to say the just is? What seems to be what seems to the stronger to be the advantage of the stronger, and whether this is advantageous or not, shall we assert that this is the way you mean it? Not in the least, he said. Do you suppose that I call a man who makes mistakes stronger at the moment when he is making mistakes? I did suppose you to mean this, I said, when you agreed that the rulers are not infallible, but also makes mistakes in some things. That's because you are a sycophant. Sycophant. Interesting. Sycophant. In arguments, Socrates, he said. To take an obvious example, do you call a man who makes mistakes about the sick a doctor because of the very mistake he is making, or a man who makes mistakes in calculation a skilled calculator at the moment he is making a mistake, in the very sense of his mistake? I suppose that this is just our manner of speaking. The doctor made a mistake, the calculator made a mistake, and the grammarian. But I suppose that each of these men, insofar as he is what we addressed him as, never makes mistakes. Hence, in precise speech, since you two speak precisely, none of the craftsmen makes mistakes. The man who makes mistakes makes them on account of a failure of knowledge, and is in that respect no craftsman. So no craftsman, wise man, or ruler makes mistakes at the moment when he is ruling, although everyone would say that the doctor made a mistake and the ruler made a mistake. What I answered you earlier, then, you must also take in this way. But what follows is the most precise way. The ruler, insofar as he is a ruler, does not make mistakes, and not making mistakes he sets down what is best for him. And this must be done by the man who is ruled. So I say the just is exactly what I have been saying from the beginning, to the advantage of the stronger. All right, Thermachus, I said, so your opinion, I play the Sophocles. You most certainly do, he said. Do I suppose I ask as I asked because I am plotting to do harm to you in the argument? I don't suppose, he said. I know it well, but it won't profit you. You won't get away with doing harm unnoticed, and, failing to get away unnoticed, you won't be able to overpower me in the argument. Nor would I even try, you blessed man, I said, but so that the same sort of thing doesn't happen to us again. Make it clear whether you meant by the ruler and stronger the man who is such only in common parlance, or the man who is in such in precise speech, whose advantage you said a moment ago, it will be just for the weaker to serve because he is stronger. The one who is the ruler is the most precise. The one who is the ruler in the most precise sense, he said. Do harm to that and play the Sophocles. I don't know what that means at all. If you can. I ask for no favors, but you won't be able to. Do you suppose me to be mad, I said, as to try to shave a lion and play the Sophocles with Damascus? At least you tried just now, he said, although you were a non-entity at that too. Enough of this, I said. Now tell me, is the doctor in the precise sense of whom you recently spoke a money-maker or one who cares for the sick? Speak about the man who is really a doctor. One who cares for the sick, he said. And about the pilot, is the man who is a pilot the correct sense a ruler of sailors or a sailor? A ruler of sailors. I suppose it needn't be taken into account that he sails in the ship, and he shouldn't be called a sailor for that. For it isn't because of sailing that he is called a pilot, but because of his art and his rule over sailors. True, he said. Is there something advantageous for each of them? Certainly. And isn't the art, I said, naturally directed towards seeking and providing for the advantage of each? Yes, that is what is directed towards. And is there any advantage for each of the arts other than to be as perfect as possible? How do you mean this question? Just as, I said, if you should ask me whether it's enough for a body to be a body or whether it needs to be something else, I would say, by all means, it needs to be something else. And the art of medicine has now been discovered because a body is defective, and it won't do for it to be like that. The art was deceived for the purpose of providing what is advantageous for a body. Would I seem to you to speak correctly in saying that or not? You would, he said. And what about medicine itself? Is it for any other art defective, and does it need some supplementary virtue? Just as eyes need sight and ears hearing, for this reason in art is needed that will consider and provide what is advantageous for them, is it also the case that there is some defect in the art, and does each art have need of other art that considers its advantage, and does that art that considers it need in its turn another of some kind, or so on endlessly? Or does each consider its own advantage by itself? Or does it need neither itself nor another to consider what its advantageous for its defect? Is it that there is no defect or error presently in any art, and that it isn't fitting for an art to seek the advantage of anything else than that of which it is the art, and that it is itself without blemish or taint because it is correct so long as it is precisely and wholly what it is, and consider this in that the precise sense, or is it so otherwise? That's the way it looks, he said. Then, I said, medicine doesn't consider the advantage of medicine, but of the body. Yes. Nor does horsemanship consider the advantage of the horsemanship, but of horses. Nor does any other art consider its own advantage, for it doesn't have any further need to, but the advantage of that which the art is. It looks that way. But Thermachus, The arts rule and are masters of that of which they are arts. He conceded this too, but with a great deal of resistance. The advantage of the then there is no kind of knowledge that considers or commands the advantage of the stronger, but rather of what is weaker and ruled by it. He finally agreed to this too, although he tried to put up a fight about it. When he had agreed, I said, then isn't it the case that the doctor, insofar as he is a doctor, considers or commands not the doctor's advantage, but that of the sick man? For the doctor is in the precise sense what was agreed to be a ruler of bodies and not of money making. Wasn't it so agreed? He assented. And was the pilot in the precise sense agreed to be a ruler of sailors and not a sailor? It was agreed. And then such a pilot and ruler will consider or command the benefit not of the pilot, but of the man who is a sailor and is ruled. He assented with resistance. Excuse me. Therefore, Thromachus, I said, there isn't ever anyone who holds any position of rule insofar as he is a ruler who considers or commands his own advantage rather than that of what is ruled and of which he himself is the craftsman. And it is looking to this end and what is advantageous and fitting for it that he says everything he says and does everything he does. When we came to this point in the argument, and it was evident to everyone that the argument about the just had turned around in the opposite direction, Thromachus, instead of answering, said, "Tell me, Socrates, do you have a wet nurse?" Why this, I said. Shouldn't you answer instead of asking such things? Because, he said, you know she neglects your sniffling nose and doesn't give it the wiping you need. Since it's her fault, you do not even recognize sheep or shepherd. Because of what in particular, I said. Because you suppose shepherds or cowherds consider the good of the sheep or the cows and fatten them and take care of them, looking to something other than their master's good and their own. And so you also believe that the rulers in the cities, those who truly rule, think about the rule differently from the way a man would regard sheep, and that night and day they consider anything else than how they will benefit themselves. And you are so far off about the just and justice, and the unjust and injustice, that you are unaware that justice and the just are really someone else's good. The advantage of the man who is stronger and rules, and a personal harm to the man who obeys and serves. Injustice is the opposite, and it rules the truly simple and just. And those who are ruled do what is advantageous for him who is stronger, and they make him whom they serve happy, but themselves not at all. And this must be considered. Most simple Socrates, the just man everywhere has less than the unjust man. First, in contracts, when the just man is partner of the unjust man, you will always find that the dissolution of the partnership, the just man does not have more than the unjust man, but less. Second, in matters pertaining to the city, when there are taxes, the just man pays more on the basis of equal property, the unjust man less. And when there are distributions, the one makes no profit and the other much. And further, when each holds some ruling office, even if the just man suffers no other penalty, it is his lot to see his domestic affairs deteriorate from neglect, while he gets no advantage from the public store, thanks to his being just. In addition to this, he incurs the ill will of his relatives and his acquaintances when he is unwilling to serve them against what is just. The unjust man's situation is the opposite in all of these respects. I am speaking of a man I just spoke of, the one who is able to get the better, in a big way. Consider him, if you want to judge how much more to his private advantage the unjust is than the just. You will learn most easily of all if you turn to the most perfect injustice, which makes the one who does injustice most happy, and those who suffer it, and who would not be willing to do injustice most wretched. And that is tyranny, which by stealth and force takes away what belongs to others, both what is sacred and profane, private and public, not bit by bit, but all at once. When someone does some part of this injustice and doesn't get away with it, he is punished and endures the greatest reproaches. Temple robbers, kidnappers, housebreakers, defrauders, and thieves are what they call those partially unjust men who do such evil deeds. But when someone, in addition to the money of citizens, kidnaps and enslaves them too, instead of these shameful names, he gets called happy and blessed, not only by the citizens, but also by whomever else hears that he has done injustice entire. For it is not because they fear doing unjust deeds, but because they fear suffering them, that those who blame injustice do so. So Socrates, injustice, when it comes to being on a sufficient scale, is mightier, freer, and more masterful than justice. And, as I have said from the beginning, the just is the advantage of the stronger, and the unjust is what is profitable and advantageous for oneself. When Thermachus had said this, he had in his mind to go away, just like a bathman, after having poured out a great shower of speech into our ears all at once. But those present didn't let him, and forced him to stay put and present an argument for what he had said. And I too, on my own, begged him and said, Thermachus, you demonic man, do you toss in such an argument and have it in mind to go away before teaching us adequately, or finding out whether it is so or not? Do you suppose you are trying to determine a small matter and not a course of life on the basis of which each of us would have the most profitable existence? What, do I suppose it is otherwise? Said Thermachus. You seem to. Or else you have no care for us, and aren't a bit concerned whether we shall live worse or better as a result of our ignorance of what you say you know. But, my good man, make an effort to show it to us. I wouldn't be a bad investment for you to do a good deed for so many as we are. I must tell you that for my part I am not persuaded, nor do I think injustice is more profitable than justice, not even if one gives it free rein and doesn't hinder it from doing what it wants. But my good man, let there be an unjust man, and let him be able to do injustice either by stealth or by fighting out in the open. Nevertheless, he does not persuade me that this is more profitable than justice, and perhaps someone else among us, and not only I, also has the sentiment. So persuade us adequately, you blessed man, that we don't deliberate correctly and in having a higher regard for justice than injustice. And how, he said, shall I persuade you, if you're not persuaded by what I've said just now? What more shall I do for you? Shall I take the argument and give your soul a forced feeding? By Zeus, don't you do it. I said, but first, stick to what you said. Or, if you change what you set down, make it clear that you're doing so, and don't deceive us. As it is, Thermachus, you see that, still considering what went before, after you had first defined the true doctor, you later thought it no longer necessary to keep a precise guard over the true shepherd. Rather, you think that he, insofar as he is a shepherd, fattens the sheep, not looking to what is best for the sheep, but, like a guest who is going to be feasted, to a good cheer, or in turn, to the sale, like a money-maker and not a shepherd. The shepherd's art surely cares for nothing but providing the best for what it has been set over. For that the art's own affairs be in the best possible way is surely adequately provided for, so long as it lacks nothing of being the shepherd's art. And similarly, I, for my part, thought just now that it is necessary for us to agree that every kind of rule, insofar as it is rule, considers what is best for nothing other than for what it is ruled and cared for, both in political and private rule. Do you think that the rulers in the cities, those who truly rule willingly? By Zeus, I don't think it. He said, I know it well. But Thermachus, I said, what about the other kinds of rule? Don't you notice that no one wishes to rule voluntarily, but they demand wages as though the benefit from ruling were not for them, but for those who are ruled? Now tell me this much. Don't we, at all events, always say that each of the arts is different on the basis of having a different capacity, and don't answer contrary to your opinion, you blessed man, so that we can reach a conclusion? Yes, this is the way they differ. And does each of them provide us with some peculiar benefit and not a common one, as the medical art furnishes us with health, the pilot's art with safety in sailing, and so forth with the others? Certainly. And does the wage earner's art furnish wages? For this is its power. Or do you call the medical art the same as the pilot's art? Or, if you wish to make precise distinctions according to the principle you set down, even if a man who is a pilot becomes healthy because sailing on the sea is advantageous to him, nonetheless, you don't for that reason call what he does the medical art. Surely not, he said. Nor do you, I suppose, call the wage earner's art the medical art, even if a man who is earning wages should be called healthy. Even if the earning wages should be healthy. Surely not. And what about this? Do you call the medical art the wage earner's art, even if a man practicing medicine should earn wages? He said that he did not. And we did agree that the benefit of each art is peculiar. Let it be, he said. Then whatever benefit all the craftsmen derive in common is plainly derived from their additional use of some one common thing that is the same for all. It seems so, he said. And we say that the benefit of the craftsmen derived from receiving wages comes to them from their use of the wage earner's art in addition. He assented with resistance. Then this benefit, getting wages, is for each not a result of his own art, but, if it must be considered precisely, the medical art produces health, and the wage earner's art wages. The house builder's art produces a house, and the wage earner's art follows upon it, wages. And so it is with all the others, each accomplishes its own work and benefits that which it has been set over. And if pay were not attached to it, would the craftsman derive benefit from the art? It doesn't look like it, he said. Does he then produce no benefit when he works for nothing? I suppose he does. Therefore, Thromachus, it is plain by now that no art or kind of rule provides for its own benefit, but, as we have been saying all along, it provides for and commands the one who is ruled, considering his advantage, that of the weaker, and not that of the stronger. It is for just this reason, my dear Thromachus, that I said a moment ago that no one willingly chooses to rule and get mixed up in the straightening out other people's troubles, but he asks for wages, because the man who is to do anything fine by art never does what is best for himself, nor does he command it, insofar as he is commanding by art, but rather what is best for the man who is ruled. It is for just this reason, as it seems, that there must be wages for those who are going to be willing to rule, either money or honor or a penalty if he should not rule. What do you mean by that, Socrates? Said Glaucon. The first two kinds of wages I know, but I don't understand what penalty you mean and how much you can say it is a kind of wage. Then you don't understand the wages of the best men, I said, on account of which the most decent men rule when they are willing to rule. Or don't you know that love of honor and love of money are said to be and are reproaches? I do indeed, he said. For this reason, therefore, I said, the good aren't willing to rule for the sake of money or honor, for they don't wish openly to exact wages for ruling and get called hirelings, nor on their own secretly to take a profit from their ruling and get called thieves. Nor again will they rule for the sake of honor, for they are not lovers of honor. Hence, necessity and a penalty must be there in addition for them. If they are going to be willing to rule, it is likely that this is a source of its being held to be shameful to seek to rule and not to await necessity. And the greatest of penalties is being ruled by a worse man if one is not willing to rule oneself. It is because they fear this, in my view, that decent men rule. When they do rule, and at the time they proceed to enter on rule, not as though they were going to something good, or as though they were going to be well off in it, but they enter on it as a necessity, and because they have no one better than or like themselves to whom to turn it over. For it is likely that if a city of good men came to be, there would be a fight over not ruling, just as there is now over ruling. And there it would become manifest that a true ruler really does not naturally consider his own advantage, but rather that of one who is ruled. Thus, everyone who knows would choose to be benefited by another rather than to take the trouble of benefiting another. So I can in no way agree with Thermachus that the just is the advantage of the stronger, but this we shall consider again at another time. What Thermachus now says, in my opinion, a far bigger thing. He asserts that the life of the unjust man is stronger than that of the just man. Which do you choose, Glaucon? And which speech is truer in your opinion? I, for my part, choose the life of the just man as more profitable. Did you hear, I said, how many good things Thermachus listed a moment ago as belonging to the life of the unjust man? I heard, but I am not persuaded. Then do you want us to persuade him, if we're able to find a way, that what he says isn't true? How could I not want it, he said. Now, I said, if we should speak at length against him, setting speech against speech, telling how many good things belong to being just, and then he should speak in return, and we again, there'll be need of counting the good things and measuring how many each of us had in each speech, and then we'll need some sort of judges, who will decide. But if we consider just as we did a moment ago, coming to agreement with one another, will ourselves be both judges and pleaders at once? Most certainly, he said. Which way do you like it? The latter, he said. Come now, Thermachus, I said. Answer us from the beginning. Do you assert excuse me. Do you assert that perfect injustice is more profitable than justice when it is perfect? I most certainly do assert it, he said, and I've said why. Well then, how do you speak about them in this respect? Surely you call one of them virtue and the other vice. Of course. Then do you call justice virtue and injustice vice? That's likely, you agreeable man. Why I also say that injustice is profitable and justice isn't. What then? The opposite, he said. Is justice then vice? No, but very high-minded innocence. Do you call injustice corruption? No, rather good counsel. Are the unjust, in your opinion, good as well as prudent, Thermachus? Yes, those who can do injustice perfectly, he said, and are able to subjugate cities and tribes of men to themselves. You perhaps suppose I am speaking of cut purses. Now such things too are profitable, he said, when one gets away with them, but they aren't worth mentioning compared to those I was just talking about. As to that, I said, I am not aware of what you want to say, but I wonder about what went before, that you put injustice in the camp of virtue and wisdom, and justice among their opposite. But I do indeed set them down as such. Okay. That's already something more solid, my comrade, I said, and it's no longer easy to know what one should say. For if you had set injustice down as profitable, but had nevertheless agreed that it is viciousness or shameful, as do some others, we would have something to say, speaking according to customary usage. But as it is, plainly, you'll say that injustice is fair and mighty, and since you also dared to set it down in the camp of virtue and wisdom, you'll set down to its account all other things which we used to set down as belonging to the just. Your divination is very true, he said, but nonetheless, one ought to hesitate to pursue the consideration of the argument as long as I understand you to say what you think. For Thermachus, you seem really not to be joking now, but to speaking the truth as it seems to you. And what difference does it make to you, he said, whether it seems so to me or not? And why don't you refute the argument? No difference, but try to answer this in addition to other things. In your opinion, would the just man be willing to get the better of the just man in anything? Not at all, he said. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the urbane, innocent man he actually is. And what about this? Would he be willing to get the better of the just action? Not even of the just action, he said. And does he claim he deserves to get the better of the unjust man and believe it to be just, or would he not believe it to be so? He'd believe it to be just, he said, and he'd claim he deserves to get the better, but he wouldn't be able to. That, I said, is not what I am asking, but whether the just man wants and claims he deserves to get the better of the unjust and not of the just man. He does, he said. And what about the unjust man? Does he claim he deserves to get the better of the just man and the just action? How could it be otherwise? Since he claims he deserves to get the better of everyone, then will the unjust man also get the better of the unjust husband, being and action, and will he struggle to take most of all for himself? Then will the unjust man also get the better of the unjust husband, being unjust human. Oh, my eyes are going. Then will the unjust man also get the better of the unjust human being and action, and will he struggle to take most of all for himself? That's it. Let us say it then as follows. The just man does not get the better of what is like, but of what is unlike, while the unjust man gets the better of like and unlike. What you say is very good, he says. And, I said, is the unjust man both prudent and good, while the just man is neither? That's good too, he said. Then, I said, is the unjust man also like the prudent and the good, while the just man is not like them? How, he said, could he not be like such men, since he is such as they, while the other is not like them? Fine. Then is each of them such as those to whom he is like? What else could they be, he said. All right, Thermachus. Do you say that one man is musical and the other is unmusical? I do. Which is prudent and which thoughtless? Surely the musical man is prudent and the unmusical man is thoughtless. Then in such things in which he is prudent, he is also good, and in those things in which he is thoughtless, bad. Yes. And about what a medical man is not the same with him? It is the same. Then you, best of men, is any musical man who is tuning a lyre, in your opinion, willing to get the better of another musical man in tightening and relaxing the string, or does he claim he deserves more? Not in my opinion, but the better of the unmusical man? Necessarily, he said. And what about a medical man? On questions of food and drink, would he want to get the better of a medical man or medical action? Surely not. But the better of what is not medical? Yes. Now, for every kind of knowledge and lack of knowledge, see if your opinion on any man at all who knows chooses voluntarily to say or do more than another man who knows and not the same as the man who is like himself in the same action. Perhaps, he said, it is necessarily so. And what about the ignorant man? Would he not get the better of both the man who knows and the man who does not? Perhaps. The man who knows is wise. I say so. And the wise man is good? I say so. Then the man who is both good and wise will not want to get the better of the like, but of the unlike and opposite. It seems so, he said. But the bad and unlearned will want to get the better of both, the like and the opposite. It looks like it. Then Thermachus, I said, does our unjust man get the better of both like and unlike? Weren't you saying that? I was. And the just man will not get the better of the like and the just man will not get the better of like but of unlike. Yes. Then I said, the just man is like the wise and good, but the unjust man like the bad and unlearned. I'm afraid so. But we were also agreeing that each is such as the one he is like. We were. Then the unjust man has revealed himself to us as good and wise, and the unjust man unlearned and bad. Now Thermachus did not agree to all of this so easily, as I tell it now, but he dragged his feet and resisted, and he produced a wonderful quantity of sweat, for it was summer. And then I saw what I had not yet seen before, Thermachus blushing. At all events, when we had come to compete argument about justice being virtue and wisdom, and injustice both vice and lack of learning, I said, all right, let that be settled for us. But we did say that injustice is mighty as well. Or don't you remember, Thermachus? Okay, I remember, he said. But even what you're saying now doesn't satisfy me, and I will have something to say about it. But if I should speak, I know well that you would say that I am making a public that's a word. Harangue. Harangue. What a weird word. So then, either let me say as much as I want, or if you want to keep on questioning, go ahead and question. And, just as with old wives who tell tales, I shall say to you, all right, and I shall nod and shake my head. Not in any case contrary to your opinion, I said. To satisfy you, he said, since you won't let me speak, what else do you want? Nothing, by Zeus. But if that's what you are going to do, go ahead and do it, and I'll ask questions. Then ask. I ask what I asked a moment ago, so that we can, in an orderly fashion, make a thorough consideration of the argument about the character of justice as compared to injustice. Surely, it was said that injustice is more powerful and mightier than justice. But now, I said, if justice is indeed both wisdom and virtue, I believe it will easily come to light that it is also mightier than injustice. Since injustice is lack of learning, no one could still be ignorant of that. But Thermachus, I do not desire it to be so simply considered, but in this way. Would you say that a city is unjust that tries to enslave other cities unjustly, and has reduced them to slavery, and keeps many enslaved to itself? Of course, he said, and it's the best city will most do, the one that is most perfectly unjust. I understand that this argument was yours, but I am considering this aspect of it. Will the city that becomes stronger than another have this power without justice, or is it necessary for it to have this power with justice? If, he said, it's as you said a moment ago, that justice is wisdom with justice. That justice is wisdom with justice. But if it's as I said, with injustice. I am full of wonder, Thermachus, I said, because you not only nod and shake your head, but also give very, very fine answers. Excuse me. It's because I am gratifying you, he said. It's good of you to do so, but gratify me this much more, and tell me, do you believe that either a city, or an army, or pirates, or robbers, or any other tribe which has some common unjust enterprise, would be able to accomplish anything if its members acted unjustly towards one another? Surely not. And what if they didn't act unjustly? Wouldn't they be more able to accomplish something? Certainly. For surely, Thermachus, it's injustice that produces factions, hatreds, and quarrels among themselves, and justice that produces unanimity and friendship. Isn't it so? Let it be so as not to differ with you. And it's good of you to do so, but you best of men. Now tell me this, if it's the work of injustice, whatever it is, to implant hatred, then when injustice comes into being, both among free men and slaves, will it not also cause them to hate one another and to form factions and to be unable to accomplish anything in common with one another? Certainly. And what about when injustice comes into being between two? Will they not differ and hate and be enemies to one another and to just men? They will. And if, then, injustice should come into being with one man, you surprising fellow, will it lose its power, or will it remain undiminished? Let it remain undiminished, he said. then does it come to light as possessing a power such that whatever it comes into wherever it comes into being, be it a city, a clan, an army, or whatever else, it first of all makes that thing unable to accomplish anything together with itself due to faction and difference, and then it makes that thing an enemy both to itself and to everything opposite and to the just. Isn't it so? Certainly. And then when it is in one man, I suppose it will do the same thing which it naturally accomplishes. First, it will make him unable to act, because he is at faction and is not of one mind with himself. And second, an enemy both to himself and to just men, won't it? Yes. And the gods too, my friend, are just? Let it be. Then the unjust man will also be an enemy to the gods, Thermachus, and the just man a friend. Feast yourself boldly on the argument, he said, for I won't oppose you, so as not to irritate these men here. Come then, I said, fill the rest of the banquet for me by answering just as you have been doing. I understand that the just come to light as wiser and better and more able to accomplish something, while the unjust can't accomplish anything with one another. For we don't speak the complete truth about those men who we say vigorously accomplish some common object with one another, although they were unjust. They could never have restrained themselves with one another if they were completely unjust. But it is plain that there was a certain justice in them which caused them at least not to do injustice to one another at the same time that they were seeking to do to others. And as a result of this, they accomplished what they accomplished. And they pursued unjust deeds when they were only half bad from injustice, since the wholly bad and perfectly unjust are also perfectly unable to accomplish anything. I say that I understand that these things are so, and not as you set them down at first, but whether the just also live better than the unjust are happier, which is what we afterwards propose for consideration must be considered. And now, in my opinion, they do also look as though they are, on the basis of what we have said. Nevertheless, this must still be considered better, for the argument is not about just any question, but about the way one should live. Well, go ahead and consider, he said. I shall. Page 32. Ooh, we're getting so close. This is the third last page. And my jaw is getting sore from talking. Okay, I shall. Tell me, in your opinion, is there some work that belongs to a horse? Yes. Would you take the work of a horse or of anything else whatsoever to be that which one can do only with it, or best with it? I don't understand, he said. Look at it this way. Is there anything with which you could see other... Look at it this way. Is there anything with which you could see other than eyes? Surely not. And what about this? Could you hear with anything other than ears? By no means. Then wouldn't we justly assert that this is the work of each? Certainly. And what about this? You could cut a slip from a vine with a dagger, or a leather cutter, or many other things. Of course. But I suppose you could not do as fine a job with anything other than a pruning knife made for this purpose. True. Then shall we take this to be its work? We shall indeed. Now I suppose you can understand better what I was asking a moment ago, when I wanted to know whether the work of each thing is what it alone can do, or can do more finely than other things. Yes, I do understand, he said. And this is, in my opinion, the work of each thing. All right, I said. Does there seem to you also to be a virtue for each thing to which some work is assigned? Let's return again to the same examples. We say that eyes have some work. They do. Is there then a virtue of eyes too? A virtue too. And what about ears? Wasn't it agreed that they have some work? Yes. And do they have virtue too? Yes, they do. And what about all other things? Aren't they the same? They are. Stop for a moment. Could eyes ever do a fine job of their work if they did not have the proper virtue, but instead of virtue, vices? How could they? For you probably mean blindness instead of sight. Whatever their virtue may be, I said, for I'm not yet asking that, but whether their work, the things to be done by them, will be done well with their proper virtue and badly with vices. What you say is true, he said. Will ears too do their work badly when deprived of their virtue? Certainly. Then shall we include everything else in the same argument? In my opinion, at least. Come, let's consider this now. Is there some work of a soul that you couldn't ever accomplish with any other thing that is? For example, managing, ruling, and deliberating, and all such things could be justly attributed them to anything other than a soul, and assert that they are peculiar to it, to nothing else. And further, what about living? Shall we not say that it is the work of a soul? Most of all, he said. Then do we say that there is also some virtue of a soul? We do. Then, Thromachus, will the soul ever accomplish its work well if it is deprived of virtue, or is that impossible? Impossible. Then a bad soul necessarily rules and manages badly, while a good one does all these things well. Necessarily. Didn't we agree that justice is a virtue of soul and injustice vice? We did so agree. Then the just soul and the just man will have a good life, and the unjust man a bad one. It looks like it, according to your argument. And the man who lives well is blessed and happy, and the man who does not is the opposite. Of course. Then the just man is happy, and the unjust man wretched. Let it be so, he said. But it is not profitable to be wretched, rather it is profitable to be happy. Of course. Then, my blessed Thromachus, injustice is never more profitable than justice. Let that, he said, be the fill of your banquet at the festival of Bendis, Socrates. I owe it to you, Thromachus, since you have grown gentle and have left off being hard on me. However, I have not had a fine banquet, but it's my own fault, not yours. For in my opinion, I am just like the gluttons who grab at whatever is set before them to get a taste of it, before they have in proper measure enjoyed what went before finding out what we were considering at first, what the just is. I let go of that and pursued the consideration of whether it is vice and lack of learning, or wisdom and virtue, and later, when in its turn, an argument that injustice is more profitable than justice fell in my way. I could not restrain myself from leaving the other one and going after this one, so that now, as a result of the discussion, I know nothing. So long as I do not know what the just is, I shall hardly know whether it is a virtue or not, and whether the one who has it is unhappy or happy. And there we go. That is the end of book 1. I think what we'll do is just read through each chapter first, one at a time, and then we'll get back to the interpretive essay to provide a more full recap and a in-depth analysis of the book, because the interpretive essay in and of itself is, I think it's about like 100, just over 100 pages. 407 to 436. Oh, sorry, 307 to 436. Yeah, so about 129 pages. So we're not going to get in that today, but anyways, this is already a long enough episode. I've been talking here for an hour 43. Holy smokes. But that is the first book of Plato's Republic. So, woohoo! We're on our way. All right, till next time.